My name is Florence, and I'm 34 years old. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor of my parents' house on a Tuesday morning in March. My vision narrowed into a tiny pinprick of light before everything suddenly went black. The very last thing I remember was the sharp crash of a ceramic mug smashing across the tile, and then, nothing. The next thing I knew, I was waking up inside an ambulance, with a paramedic shining a flashlight into my eyes, asking me to tell him my name. My father, Gerald, was the one who found me, and my mother, Eleanor, was the one who called 911. But by the time I was wheeled through the emergency room doors, they were already long gone. I found out later from a nurse, who honestly thought I already knew, that my father had looked down at me lying on the kitchen floor, checked his watch, and casually said, "She fainted. She'll be fine. Our flight with your sister leaves at 6. My younger sister, Wendy, was getting married in Cancun that weekend, and my parents had a connecting flight leaving the city that afternoon that they absolutely didn't want to miss. So they left me lying on the kitchen floor for the paramedics to handle, gave a quick statement to the responding officer, and headed straight to the airport with my suitcase still packed for a vacation I would never get to take. I had been the one asked to stay behind, house sit, and water the plants while everybody else soaked up the sunshine and celebrated without me. The hospital admitted me with a diagnosis that scared me even more than collapsing had. I had a severe cardiac arrhythmia combined with dangerously low blood pressure, most likely triggered by a medication interaction nobody had caught. The doctors told me that if I had been alone at my apartment instead of my parents' house, there's a good chance nobody would have found me in time. I spent that first night hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily through the darkness, staring at the doorway, convinced that anyone, would walk through it at any minute. Nobody ever did. I called my mother's cell phone twice before finally giving up, realizing that whatever she was doing in Cancun clearly mattered more than whatever was happening to my heart in that hospital bed. That realization hit hard, like, seriously hard. The days started blurring together after that. I spent 9 long days in that cardiac ward completely alone, watching other patients receive balloons, flowers, homemade soup packed in Tupperware containers, and visits from people who actually cared enough to show up. Meanwhile, my own bedside table held nothing except a plastic cup of water and a call button that I pressed less and less as each day passed. Eventually, I stopped expecting anyone to come. The nurses became my only real company. One of them especially stood out, a woman named Dolores, who ran the cardiac ward with the quiet confidence of somebody who had seen every possible way a family could let a patient down. During her breaks, she'd quietly bring me extra pudding cups from the cafeteria and sit beside me for a while. She never once asked why nobody came to visit me. She simply stayed, and in the strange, sterile loneliness of that room, her presence became the only thing that truly felt like family. On the 9th day, I heard voices echoing through the hallway before I ever saw who they belonged to, and my stomach instantly sank the same way it used to when I was a little girl and somehow just knew I was about to get blamed for something I hadn't even done. My parents strolled in with airport tags still hanging from their suitcases, wearing fresh Caribbean tans, chatting with the nurses at the front desk as casually as if they were checking out of a hotel instead of checking on the daughter they had completely left behind. My father didn't apologize. He didn't even bother sitting down. Instead, loud enough for practically the whole floor to hear, he announced that they were there to sign my discharge papers and take me home, as though 9 straight days of silence could somehow be wiped away with one signature. Like, seriously, that was it? That's when Dolores, the head nurse, stepped directly into the doorway of my room and blocked it with her body. Her arms folded across her chest. Her face completely unreadable. "She's not yours to discharge anymore," she said. The words landed in that room like a heavy stone dropping into perfectly still water. My father's expression shifted from irritation to total confusion. My mother's mouth opened, then closed again without a single word coming out. I just stared at Dolores while my heart monitor beside me started beeping faster, trying to figure out what in the world she meant. Because as far as I knew, I was still their daughter. Still connected to them by blood. And by every piece of paperwork patients sign when they're admitted to a hospital. Dolores never flinched. She glanced down at the clipboard in her hands, then calmly looked back at my parents before speaking again. The person responsible for her care isn't either of you. The sentence cracked open everything I thought I understood about my admission. About those 9 lonely days I had spent forgotten in that ward. About the family I had always assumed still had some claim over what happened to me. Ask the man who, she began. Then she stopped herself. Instead of finishing, she slowly turned toward me. She looked straight into my eyes as though she was waiting for my permission to say a name neither of us had spoken aloud in years. A name that was about to flip my entire world upside down. A name that would completely change everything I believed about who had actually been taking care of me while my own family boarded a plane, flew off to paradise, and left me behind. Dolores held my gaze for a long, silent moment, almost giving me one last chance to stop her. I didn't say a word. I simply gave the smallest nod. She turned back toward my parents and quietly finished what she had started. Ask the man who's been calling this hospital every single day for the past 9 days asking about her condition. Ask the man who updated her emergency contact information the morning she was admitted. Ask the man whose name is now listed as her medical power of attorney. The color instantly drained from my mother's face beneath her sun-kissed tan. My father's jaw tightened, the same way it always did whenever he realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. I lay there gripping the thin hospital blanket, completely stunned, trying to understand who Dolores could possibly be talking about. Because the only people who had ever been listed on any of my paperwork were the 2 people standing right there in that doorway. The 2 people who, for the very first time in my life, looked like complete strangers. The answer walked through the door less than a minute later. And it wasn't even close to who I expected. It was Desmond, my downstairs neighbor of 6 years. A quiet, dependable guy who had fixed my leaking faucet during the very first week I moved into my apartment. Ever since then, he'd brought me coffee almost every Sunday morning, never asking for anything in return except a few minutes of conversation in the stairwell. Just a genuinely solid guy. I hadn't even realized he knew I was in the hospital. As it turned out, the morning I collapsed, my phone was still tucked inside my coat pocket. When the paramedics searched it for an emergency contact after my parents walked away from the scene, they found Desmond's name saved under "in case of emergency." I'd filled that out years earlier on a total whim after a scary asthma attack, never imagining it would actually matter one day. Desmond told me later that he received the call while he was watering his own plants 2 floors below my apartment. He dropped everything. Within an hour, he was standing at my hospital bedside. And from that moment on, he never stopped showing up. My father demanded to know why a neighbor had any legal authority over his own daughter. His voice grew louder with every word until it echoed through the hallway. Dolores never raised hers. She calmly explained that hospital policy required a designated emergency contact who could actually be reached and remain available to make medical decisions. For 9 straight days, every call placed to the number listed for my parents had gone directly to voicemail. Every single one. Meanwhile, Desmond answered every call the hospital made. He signed every consent form the doctors needed. He spent more nights sitting in the family waiting room than he spent sleeping in his own apartment. Somewhere in the blur of fear, sleepless nights, and machines constantly beeping through the darkness, the doctors needed immediate approval for an emergency procedure to stabilize my heart rhythm. The signature on that form wasn't my father's. It was Desmond's. Because while my father was over 2,000 miles away raising a champagne glass at a rehearsal dinner, Desmond was sitting outside an operating room praying I'd make it through. My mother finally tried to smooth things over. She said they came back as soon as Wendy's wedding ended. She insisted they never meant for 9 whole days to pass. She claimed they assumed I was okay because nobody had called to tell them otherwise. That was the moment I finally found my voice. It came out rough and shaky from hardly speaking for days. "I called you," I said quietly. "Twice. From this hospital bed. You never answered." The room went completely silent. My mother didn't have a single response. Not one. My father muttered something about how families sometimes have to make sacrifices and how Wendy's wedding couldn't simply be postponed. That's when it finally hit me. This wasn't some misunderstanding. It wasn't bad timing. It wasn't an unfortunate series of events. This was simply who they were. Who they'd always been. And for 34 years, I had excused it as bad luck, busy schedules, or unfortunate circumstances. Now I finally had the guts to call it exactly what it was. Desmond stood quietly near the window through almost the entire confrontation, letting me deal with my parents on my own. He never interrupted, never tried to speak for me. The only time he stepped forward was when my father insisted that he was taking me home himself. "She already has a ride," Desmond said simply. There wasn't an ounce of anger in his voice. No attitude. No drama. Just quiet confidence. And somehow, that calm certainty made my father back off in a way nothing else ever could. 2 hours later, Dolores personally completed my discharge paperwork. When it was finally time to leave, it wasn't my parents who wheeled me through those hospital doors. It was Desmond. He carefully pushed my wheelchair all the way to his car, making sure I was comfortable every step of the way. When we arrived at my apartment building, I realized he'd already thought of everything. My refrigerator had been stocked with soup, fresh groceries, and bottled water. A recliner had been set up beside the living room window, so I wouldn't have to struggle up the stairs to my bedroom while I recovered. Every little detail had already been taken care of. Without asking for recognition. Without expecting anything in return. Without making a big deal out of it. That's when I finally understood something that had been right in front of me for years. Desmond had quietly been building a life raft beneath me for 6 years, while my own family had been drifting farther and farther away without me even realizing it. My parents left that hospital parking lot with absolutely nothing resolved. And in the months that followed, I never spoke to either of them again. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I hated them. But because, for the first time in my life, I finally saw everything with complete clarity. I finally understood that love isn't measured by shared DNA. It isn't determined by a last name. And it definitely isn't proven by saying, "We're family." Real love is shown by the people who actually show up. The people who stay beside you when your heart is literally failing. The people who refuse to leave until you're strong enough to stand on your own again. Desmond and I are engaged now. Every once in a while, I open my nightstand drawer and look at the hospital bracelet I decided to keep. It reminds me of the worst week of my life. But it also reminds me of something even more important. It reminds me exactly who chose me when it mattered most. And the truth is, it was never the people I expected. If this story touched your heart, and you've ever had to learn the hard way who your real family truly is, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. There are so many more powerful stories waiting to be shared, and I promise you, they only get more unforgettable from here.